From 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into the things that have got you talking today. Speaking of today and what people are talking about, another day, more party leaks. I can tell you, I've got very strong opinions and a lot to say about that, so I will be kicking off with that. But Beijing Barry, as the saying goes, what's that all about? The Chinese, the Labour Party? What on earth? And the statue outside the BBC offices that's been damaged, guess what? It's not going to be taken down. What do you think to that? And school uniforms. A row has broken out again about school uniforms. What do you think to them? Are they essential? Are they silly? I want all your thoughts on all those topics, but first, let's have a little look at the headlines.
I'm Polly Middlehurst on GB News. The top stories. The former Director General of the government's COVID task force, Kate Josephs, has apologised for holding leaving drinks in December 2020 when indoor socialising was banned. It comes after it emerged two parties were held the day before the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral in May. Downing Street has apologised, saying it was deeply regrettable that they took place at a time of national mourning. Restrictions meant the Queen had to sit alone for her husband's funeral the following day. Virginia Giuffre says she's pleased a judge has ruled her civil sex abuse case against the Duke of York can go ahead. Ms Giuffre says she wants to expose the truth. Prince Andrew denies all the allegations. And it comes after the Duke was stripped of his royal patronages and military titles yesterday. The royal commentator Jenny Bond told GB News that Andrew's Duke of York title might also now be in doubt.
Development is that one of the MPs who represents York has said we don't want him to be Duke of York either. That is a taint on our city. One or two other voices in York are saying the same thing. So that's absolutely in the gift of the Queen. He was made the Duke of York on the day of his wedding. And there's been no word from the palace that they're considering stripping him of that as well. But the pressure will continue.
Jenny Bond. GB News can confirm more than 550 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats in the first 2 weeks of this year. 4 boats with around 100 migrants have been intercepted so far today. It comes as the French authorities investigate the death of one migrant who drowned after his small boat got into difficulties early this morning near Boulogne. An Australian court has ordered Novak Djokovic to be detained from 8 a.m. local time tomorrow. He will, however, be allowed to attend his lawyer's offices. It follows a government decision to revoke the tennis player's visa for a second time, saying it was in the public interest. The unvaccinated tennis star previously won his court appeal against being deported. The first Grand Slam of the year starts Monday. The government is due to hold a review into how a Chinese agent was able to get so close to senior British politicians. It comes after MI5 warned the agent had been interfering in UK politics. Downing Street has said it's deeply concerning. China has denied the allegations, saying it has no need to buy influence in any foreign parliament. The Security Minister, Damien Hines, told GB News MI5 issued the alert to put a stop to the spy's activities.
It's the system at work, and these notices are one tool that the Security Service has at its disposal. But what we've seen yesterday is a disruption of this activity. I'm afraid that we're likely to see more of these in the future.
The Six Nations rugby tournament will now go ahead as planned as outdoor COVID restrictions are eased in Wales following a rapid decline in COVID cases there. Wales First Minister Mark Drakeford set out his roadmap to lifting restrictions if the downward trend continues. GB News Wales correspondent Lily Hewitson has more.
This is a four-stage plan which sees nightclubs reopen and crowds welcome back to sporting events here in Wales. Now, this starts tomorrow with the number of people who can attend an outdoor event rising from just 50 to 500. From the 21st of January, sports events will be able to welcome back crowds, and on the 28th, nightclubs will be able to reopen.
On DAB+, on your radio, on TV and online, this is GB News. Now Dewbs & Co.
Hello there, welcome back, and thanks for that. With me until 7 o'clock, keeping me company, my panel, Lord Daniel Moylan, who's the former advisor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Nabila Ramdani, journalist and broadcaster, and Frank Furedi, author and academic. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us and what we're thinking. It's very much about you as well and what's on your mind. I want your thoughts on all of the different topics that we cover tonight. You can get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. And of course, we're everywhere, aren't we? We're on Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. You can find us anywhere, so do get in touch and let me know what you're thinking about. But I'll tell you what I'm thinking about today. Now, you might want to get a cup of tea and sit down because I tell you, I've got a lot to say because today the media is yet again filled to the brim with more leaks of parties during lockdowns. Now, if you're somebody who wants all the details, you will find them pretty much everywhere. They're on every single news website, in every paper, and on every TV channel, back to back. The details are all there in minute detail. But if you'll forgive me, I'll spare you that and tell you the short version. It's basically details of more parties, gatherings, work dues, call them whatever you want. They've been leaked again today. This time, civil servants, and shock, horror, and even worse for some people, on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. The media has predictably gone into overdrive. The images of that heartbreaking scene of the Queen alone at her husband's funeral and an apology issued by Number 10 to the Queen. Now, my heart breaks for anybody whose loved ones were forced to die alone, for those who couldn't attend a funeral, for those who had to give birth alone or couldn't visit loved ones. The list, of course, goes on. I myself, in fact, was hospitalised for a month during this pandemic and denied a single visitor. It was one of the hardest experiences of my life and one which continued when my baby was in intensive care for weeks and I was forced to be there alone without any support because of the rules. Many of these rules were inhumane. There is no other word for it. To hear then that those in charge broke the rules that they helped set creates an anger, and it's one that I fully understand. But what's happening in the media goes beyond that. This isn't just about gatherings or rules. This is, in my view, a systematic takedown of a Prime Minister. But for me personally, I do not appreciate the hypocrisy of media outlets revelling in this situation when many of their journalists broke the rules too. The Sun newspaper, for example, is frequently critical of Partygate, yet it turns out today that one of the parties, on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral, was for the PM's former Director of Communications, a man who is now the Deputy Editor of The Sun. He has, of course, apologised, but the hypocrisy is astounding. And it's not just the media, by the way. The opposition party, desperately seeking sad stories to share that relate to the date of the parties. But they don't share these stories out of sympathy to those affected. They do it, of course, to try and land blows on the government because they have become so weak that the only gains that they can make are not due to their own strengths, but due to the weakness of others. The hypocrisy, of course, is that Labour voted for the rules which caused this suffering and would probably have gone a lot further too. And do not get me started on why these things are being leaked. Do not be fooled. It is not because of an upset re-rule breaking. This is personal vendettas being served. Revenge, some might call it. But what I call it is manipulation. Our understandable anger at some of the inhumane rules and the fury that those who set them but didn't follow them is being leveraged for people to score points. And I wish it would stop. For if we're going to have these conversations, we should also be asking, who is leaking this stuff? Why is there so much info and content being leaked from government buildings, for example? Do you remember that Hancock CCTV link? Ooh, I tell you, I will never unsee that. But why, though, should our news agenda be hijacked like this for personal vendetta, especially at a time when there is so much else that we should be focused on and progressing with? Now, as I said right at the start, what we're seeing here is a systematic takedown of a Prime Minister. And as to whether or not that is justified, I'll leave you to be the judge. I'm sure that there'll be very many different opinions, and rightly so, because that is, of course, the beauty of a democracy. Nabila, I had to get all that off my chest. I am sorry, and thank you for waiting patiently while I did so. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think the nation will be as passionate and divided over the issue as most of us on this panel would be. But I think what this story suggests, and the timing of it suggests, is Boris Johnson clearly has got some enemies. This is very obvious to me, and they think that he's a liability. Remember that Boris Johnson is very much associated with the slogan, "Get Brexit done." They might think that he's fulfilled his historic duty of delivering Brexit, and it's time for a change. And a lot of these leaks started to happen around Christmas time, remember? And it might be that Conservative Party backstabbers think that it's about time to introduce some change in the new year. We've seen interviews emerging in papers, for example, like Lord Frost, who spoke to the Mail on Sunday, exclusively saying that the party needs to be realigned along more traditional lines, for example. So there's clearly an awful lot of frustrations within his own party. And what fascinates me is that with all the problems we're having in the world, it could be that boozy parties could actually bring the end to the career of an elected world leader. And we all know that Boris Johnson is associated with, he's very much of a party animal and he likes to drink, but he's always managed to combine fun with more serious roles in his life. But in my view, the real issue here is not so much a witch hunt. It's about millions of people who are very ill and dying, and people who are absolutely furious at a government who brought about restrictions and lockdowns with such convictions and have been breaking such rules themselves. And it's about people spending months in hospitals. It's about people also being kept apart from their loved ones for months, if not years, because of the pandemic. And there is clearly a time and place for partying. Winston Churchill used to do that all the time. But I'm sure, even though there are people who are quite amused by the antics that have been associated with this whole story about smuggling booze at Downing Street, the salient point here is about millions of people who are still suffering from the pandemic, a pandemic which is still going on.
Well, yeah, and I have to say, when it comes to these rules, one of the things that this whole thing has taught me is I was terrified of COVID at the start of all this. I just mentioned there, I was hospitalised, I was pregnant, I was terrified. But it's made me realise that actually the people closest to the data, those in the know, if you like, they clearly weren't that terrified, or else they wouldn't have been mingling and mixing as much as they did. Frank, your thoughts?
I'm really furious at the parties, mainly because that's what we should have all been doing at that time. I think the rules were over the top. I think it was quite unreasonable, for example, to prevent people from socializing in the outdoors. I'm very angry when I saw people being arrested pretty much on the same week as Boris and his mates were partying. But what I'm really furious about is not the partying, but the way in which snitching has now become a kind of an art form which is practiced by individuals. Because you see, what I'm really worried about, when you take a step back, is that the British state, is leaking left and right. And if they can leak news about a party, what about state secrets that are really quite important?
Indeed.
That are to do with security or terrorism or even about economic policy? And what I'm really concerned about is that while the media is going gung-ho in trying to target sort of Johnson and his coterie, what they are never really discussing is how can you run a government when everything you say becomes public knowledge the day after you said it. I mean, it really is worrying when WhatsApp messages and emails sort of transmitted by our leading politicians become public property, because that basically means that there is no longer such thing as a state secret. And we don't ask the questions what the motives are of these individuals, then we end up in a situation where the people that are exposing this are, in my book, far more malevolent than the people that are out there partying.
Now, Daniel, I saved you until the end there, because you are a Tory life peer now in the House of Lords. You're a former advisor to Boris Johnson. I'm fascinated to hear your take.
Well, going back to your original point, Michelle, first of all, this clearly is coordinated, and it is part of a campaign which has come in waves every 2 or 3 months of attacks, blitzes, some of which stick. It was wallpaper at some stage and so on. Some stick, some don't. And it's coordinated by somebody who is trying to bring the Prime Minister down, or some group of people. And we don't know who they are. If they succeed, of course, I bet they'll be falling over themselves to come out in public and claim the credit for it, but we don't know who they are now. But it's definitely a coordinated attempt to bring him down. The second thing is, I think there's a really interesting parallel here with the United States, because the Democrats who tried to bring down Trump during his 4 years in office, for example, by accusing him, spending 2 years accusing him of being a Russian agent, when of course it turned out there was no evidence to support that at all, and nothing in the case at all. What they were doing was new, and they're applying the technique here as well. They were not opposing a president on his policies. They were trying to delegitimize him, to say that he shouldn't have been elected in the first place, that his election was somehow invalid. And that's the technique that is being applied to Boris now. It's not that they oppose his policies. I mean, they do some and other. That's perfectly legitimate. Oppose the government's policies. That's democracy. That's fine. It's to try and make out constantly that he's unfit for office. The way they use the word liar the whole time, when actually there isn't a lot. I mean, Boris uses loose language. There's no evidence that he's a systematic liar. These are people who would never use the word liar against Tony Blair, who certainly did present facts to us which turned out, as he probably knew, not to be correct. But constantly trying to make out that he's unfit for office, not because they oppose the policies, but because they've learnt from the Americans. And I think this is a very dangerous precedent, because, of course, two can play at that game. And if this is how politics is going to carry on in this country, it's going to be very dangerous for democracy. You delegitimize the elected Prime Minister. His legitimacy is being elected. You have to respect that in a democracy.
Maybe there is a case for bringing him down for all the right reasons. And maybe there is a case of people internally questioning his common sense, questioning his policies at a time when a nation is going through very, some hardships.
Yeah, and there's a very good method to bring him down, a democratic method, which is to vote him out at an election.
Well,
and that is how our democracy works.
But you can
not by undermining and delegitimizing and seeking to force him out of office when he's been elected to carry it out with a very large majority.
But perhaps what you call undermining and what Frank calls snitching is simply scrutiny and holding a public figure to account.
It's fine. Let the people who wish to scrutinize him come out in public with the evidence and say who they are.
And argue in public. I mean, we can have a public debate about his policies, and the people who are behind this campaign could stand up in public and declare their views and sentiments and test them out with the electorate or with the other MPs.
But it's often the case that it's anonymous whistleblowers that bring about
I don't regard these people as whistleblowers. They're engaged. These are not people who have stumbled across some malfeasance which they're shocked about. This is clearly a systematic campaign running over the course mostly of the last year. The information has been stored up and is being released, and I think you recognize that as a journalist, is being released to order, so to speak, on a drip basis. And then if he survives this, they'll go quiet for a couple of months and it'll start again on another topic.
Oh, there is definitely an agenda, but all I'm arguing is it might be a legitimate one.
Well, I don't understand.
But there's nothing legitimate in a democratic
could be
society,
behaved.
open
I mean,
society, to behave in this underhanded manner. Because if you do that, then you're relying upon essentially forms of manipulation and psychological warfare rather than a rational engagement with the public about issues of the day. And I think that's what they should be doing if they are genuinely concerned about his policies. Because we take prime ministers down not because of their personality, but because of their policies being wrong or their ineptitude.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been demonstrated.
And his ineptitude to abide by his own rules, for example.
Well, I think the whole question about the rules has to be seen. I mean, like the latest parties, he wasn't even in London when those parties took place. I mean, how can he be held? He was at Chequers when the ones that were out today. There's no suggestion Boris was at these parties. Well, and even if he was in the building, was he expected to keep running down into the base? I believe they started in basements. Is he meant to go running down to the basements to check them the whole time?
Well, he's apologised himself, so there is an amount.
He hasn't apologised for these parties particularly because he wasn't at them. He's apologised for the party he attended for 25 minutes in the garden.
There you go, and I think there you go. You see, there is a mix of different opinions, isn't there? Here and at home, Graham and Anne have been in touch saying, well, regards snitching, Michelle, simple. If you don't do things wrong, then there's nothing to snitch about. Alan has said, if MPs are found doing nothing wrong, then why does it matter? Sorry, if MPs are found to be doing wrong, then why does it matter why and how it's exposed? Alan says, another party, is this the best they've got? They must be desperate to keep trying to use this as a weapon. Mark says, dear Michelle, your analysis at the start was absolutely correct. Whereas Alan has said, my view is that Michelle's monologue was completely ridiculous. There you go. As I said, lots of mixed opinions. Do keep them coming in. Going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about China, Labour, Beijing Barry. What on earth is going on?
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. That topic of conversation there about parties and Boris, etc., has got lots of you talking. Your emails are flying in, and I shall be reading some out again slightly later in the programme. But if you want to get in touch, tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News, or email at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's move on though, shall we? There's another story that lots of people seem to be talking about today as well. Labour ex-Minister Barry Gardiner received more than £500,000 from an alleged Chinese government agent, Christine Lee. Now, I have to say, Gardiner has admitted that he did discuss policy with her, but he has insisted that the agent gained no political advantage for the Chinese state. China has denied anything like spying allegations last night, saying that it had no need to buy influence in any foreign parliament. Do have to be clear, of course, that it wasn't just Barry Gardiner that received funding. Funding seemed to be going in different directions, albeit to much, much smaller amounts. What's going on? Should we be trusting China? Daniel?
Well, we don't trust China, I hope. I mean, the Chinese government has become highly autocratic over the last few years under the current president. And so domestically, it's become an almost total surveillance state. And it has used its power to crush any possibility of resistance to its rule amongst the Uyghurs. And then we've seen even more graphically what they've been doing in Hong Kong, contrary to their agreement with the United Kingdom, over the last couple of years. But their ambitions outside China are just as frightening in many ways. They're highly military ambitions as far as the Pacific is concerned. And as for not needing to buy influence, I mean, they've been buying influence throughout Africa and much of the Third World, South Asia, and so forth for the last 10 years. Now, I don't want to make a party political point about Barry Gardiner. He is a Labour MP. He took £500,000. He employed the son of this lady who's now been exposed as an agent for China. I believe Sir Edward Davey, or his constituency association, also received a much smaller sum of money. It's hard to think that this was being done philanthropically. So one has to wonder why China, through its agent, felt that this was an appropriate use of money. Obviously, Labour Party policy was discussed with her, but she obtained no influence, we're told. So quite what was going on, and I'm puzzled what Mr. Gardiner thought was going on, but he will answer his own case. I'm not here to make party political points. We shouldn't trust China. It's also deeply embedded in our universities, our industry, and so on. We need to be very clear that this is a dangerous dependency we are developing, and we need to wean ourselves away from it.
Indeed. Frank?
Well, there's two broad points. First of all, I'm against allowing foreign agents to make political donations, which is going on in any case, not just China. Middle Eastern interests, other interests are always giving money to politicians, and I'm very suspicious of that. But I think more importantly, we now have a lot of evidence in countries like Australia, where what happened in the case of Barry Gardiner is been very much the norm. A lot of politicians of both parties in Australia have received large amounts of money from China. And you can almost see a kind of semi-takeover of Australian political institutions under Chinese influence. And the point here is that what I'm really kind of concerned about is that because the West has become so addicted to China, particularly in the domain of trade and in economics, we're literally opening up our gates to the point at which universities, I work in a university, and the influence of China in higher education is phenomenally important. They play a very important role in giving money to British universities, and they're getting their hands on innovations that are being made by British academics. We see a situation where industry, a lot of people working in industry and in science, have lost sight of the fact that their interests are not the same as that of China. And almost imperceptibly, we have a world where, through the use of financial instruments, China has established a very, very strong foothold in Western Europe, but also in Britain. I think that's something that should worry us. It isn't just Gardiner, it's a much broader point that we should be worried about.
Nabila?
Yes, I agree with that. I think China is one of those vast and hugely important nations that we don't really know much about, and we're associated with communism and, as Daniel said, all kinds of repressions, and of course it's now infamously linked with spreading the coronavirus pandemic. But despite of all this, we have natural and obvious allies such as America, who tend to get a lot more criticism. I'm not surprised at all by the fact that China is spying everywhere. It's very well known. It's a Marxist-Leninist regime, and that's what Marxist-Leninist regimes are very good at. And technically, we could say the First Cold War is over, but it does actually continue in many different ways. And I think the whole point about an ideologically focused country like Russia, where one single party only exists, it's that it wants to shape the world along its own lines, and it requires constant spying and indeed constant information about the opposition. What is interesting in this case, however, is that the spying has been done by a live person. And, so much spying nowadays being done by drones or indeed carried out by computer bugs and technology in general. So this is an interesting aspect. It's actually an old-fashioned way of doing the spying. But to be perfectly honest, I think we're all spied under by authorities all the time, and there's very little we can do to stop foreign powers joining in.
I think it's a little unfair, a little inaccurate to say this is spying, because if you wanted a lot of secret information, you would not spend £500,000 buying it from Barry Gardner, because he hasn't got any secret information. This is not so much about spying, this is about the purchase of influence. And it seems to me, I mean, he has said no influence was purchased and he must make his case. But in leaving him aside, just as a general picture, and Frank mentioned Australia, China would like to run the world, so to speak, without having to conquer it. So what it wants is deference. And what it wants, say, from Australia is it doesn't mind how Australia runs its politics on most issues, but on the matters that are important to China, it wants respect and deference from other states. And that's what the whole of the Belt and Road, the policies, the investments in Africa, in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, is to remind them that they'll be reminded on a matter that's important to China, listen up, remember us, we're here, you've let us in. That's the problem.
I think the influence is really important, because what China is also doing is setting up these academic institutions, Confucius institutions all over the world, whose objective is to sell China as an ideal, as an intellectual, moral ideal for the rest of the world. And I think that's part and parcel of its foreign policy. It's what China is trying to achieve is their equivalent of American soft power. Because once you have more soft power, and once we're able to influence the younger generations in particular, I think that gives you an incredible advantage in the global marketplace.
But I think it ties in with what you're saying,
briefly,
Daniel, is that it ties in with the great historical failures of left-wing organisations in general, who tend to go broke before long. And I think it's very much to do with finding a way of raising funds. And, I think socialism is all about redistribution of wealth, as it were, and they are a bit more uncomfortable with excessive profiteering or indeed raising huge amounts of money like this.
Well, there you go. Now, I just want to move, before I go to my next break, I do want to touch very briefly on a story that we actually covered yesterday about the statue at the BBC Broadcasting House. You will have seen, I'm sure, the footage of, that activist, if you want to call him that, up there with his chisel or hammer or whatever it was. Well, that's kind of been looked into at the moment on one side. But there's been talk about whether or not the statue should have even been there in the first place. And the BBC has come out now and said that although there were debates to be had about the sculptor Eric Gill's life, they had no plans to remove the statue. This comes after a man, of course, was arrested on suspicion of criminal damage, as I've just mentioned there. What do you think to that? I have to say, I was quite surprised that the BBC had so quickly come out and said that the statue will remain. Should it remain? Should it not remain? Do you even care? Frank Freddy.
Well, I think it's a good call. We need to make a distinction between the sculptor and the art, because if we begin to judge every single piece of art by the moral attitudes and behavior of the artist, then I think there's been a lot of paintings that will be burned, a lot of books that will not be published.
Yeah, but there's a difference between appreciating artwork and putting someone into a statue to celebrate that person, right?
Well, I
Not
don't.
a statue of Gill.
Well, I don't think it's a statue of Gill. I thought it was
a statue by
But
Gill.
but the whole point of having a statue there is celebrating, surely, what this is the argument, because we debated this yesterday.
I think this was an integral part of a listed building. There are a number of buildings in London from that period that have sculptures by Gill, Epstein, and contemporaries of theirs that are built into part of the fabric. And I think this is an integral part of a listed building. For one thing, they couldn't take it down without listed building consent. They'd be committing an offence themselves.
Would they really?
They tried to do it. Yeah, I think this is Broadcasting House, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't realise that.
I'm sure that's listed, and this is 19. This is.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just didn't realise that would be.
I'm sure. I'm 90% sure. It's worth checking out.
It is, but also I think we should make a distinction between the statue, which we can celebrate, and the artists who we can condemn.
Absolutely agree with that.
So
I mean, and think back historically when social attitudes have been very different. I mean, in the 19th century, people would have gone around destroying Michelangelo statues because he was homosexual.
This is very true.
And then they might have done that. And we would say probably now that would be a matter for regret, I think.
But Nabila, what do you think about, because, I mean, this topic kind of engenders quite a strong debate. Life has moved on. In terms of lots of things that went on, historically, that were acceptable at the time. And I've got to say, some of the things that this particular person were doing, I'm not sure would ever be acceptable, but nonetheless, history has moved on. So sometimes, when we look back at people, we apply the kind of lens of moral goodness and all the rest of it that we have now, and we apply it historically. Do you think we should do that?
Well, I guess technically you could look at anything and find some kind of link with a bad or a person if you wanted to, but it doesn't give you the right to destroy it. As simple as that. I think it boils down to an act of vandalism. If you're talking about, I mean, some people might argue that if you live in a society where it's anarchy or in the brink of war or there's a totalitarian regime in place and you want to bring down the symbols of that kind of oppression, then that's fair enough. But we live in a very stable, democratic societies, and there are other means of expressing your discontent through the democratic vote, for example, or legitimate public debate.
Well, what do you think to this situation? I touched upon this yesterday. I worry that the Colston verdict almost has created an open season, if you like, for people to take to statues with a hammer, with a chisel, and try and take them down simply because they don't approve of the person or the representation or the things that person did once upon a time. Let me know your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm going to move on there. I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk to you. I'm going to change the mood, change the direction, because I want to talk to you about school uniforms. What do you think to them? Are they a necessary thing or not? I'm asking because a school in Cheshire has basically decided that the kids have to wear the correct coats, and if they don't, they'll be stripping the children. So you've had various, not stripping them naked, that would be weird, but stripping the jackets off these children. So here we are in cold weathers. You've had kids not being allowed to wear their own coats and jackets outside because they weren't the right school uniform. What do you think to that? I'll see you in just a few minutes.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs and Co. We was just continuing our conversation there, the one that we were just having a second ago about statues, and can you kind of separate a person, the person's art, their achievements, from some of their personal activities? And we were just talking, of course, about the font. Gil, what is it? Is it Gil Sans? Gil?
Yeah, there are several variants on it.
Yeah, the Gil font that was created. We were just pondering whether or not that will remain. Who knows? Anyway, I just wanted to come back to another point we discussed on the show yesterday. We were talking, of course, about the self-isolation rule changes, and we had a doctor on as well. And one of the conversations that we had was around the rule changes and how they applied to so-called fully vaccinated people and not vaccinated people or not fully vaccinated people. And I have to say, I think there's been quite a lot of misunderstanding around the rule changes. The doctor that we had on suggested that the rule changes didn't apply to those people that were unvaccinated, and lots of the media have reported the same, suggesting that the rule changes only occurred for so-called fully vaccinated people. Anyway, we reached out to the government departments for comment and for clarity and received the following statement. The rules for contacts have not changed. Fully vaccinated individuals who are identified as contacts of someone with COVID-19 should take daily rapid lateral flow tests for 7 days, but are not legally required to self-isolate. Unvaccinated contacts are legally required to self-isolate for the full 10-day period. So I think what's been going on in the media is that there's been a little bit of confusion. The good news is that the shortening of the self-isolation period applies to all, irrespective of vaccination status. The other flip side of this is, as I've just been mentioning there, for the contacts of, so not a positive case, the contacts of, the full 10-day isolation for the unvaccinated remains. I just wanted to add that point of clarity because I do think accurate information is very important. Anyway, let's move on, shall we, and talk about school uniforms. What do you think to them? Many think that they're quite controversial. I don't. I actually think they're a good idea and a tool to prevent bullying, if you ask me. But the average school uniform costs £337. And of course, that means that many parents will struggle to afford that, especially if you've got more than one child. And it's reported this week that pupils at a high school in Cheshire had their coats confiscated by teachers after they breached branded uniform policy. But parents say that the school coat was an optional part of the uniform. It just got me thinking about this whole kind of uniform conversation. Do you think that we should still have them? Are they really necessary or not, Frank?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems in British education at the moment in schools is school discipline. I mean, that is a really big issue because it's very difficult to teach properly. It's very difficult to get young people to become inspired by ideas when you have a continuous undermining of discipline by a section of young people. And I think that because of the problem of discipline, school uniforms are really quite essential. I think school uniforms create a context and an environment whereby there's a certain expectation of common behavior. I think that very often when you see children all wearing the same clothes, there's far less scope for bullying or lashing out at one another, making fun of each other's clothes. But most importantly, from my experience going around schools, is that very often kids develop a pride in their education through the clothes that they wear, and they begin to identify with the whole mission and the whole project of education, partially because of the clothes that they wear. And I think that school uniforms at this stage in time are really quite essential. Now, there's a problem, and there's a conflict, because obviously this costs a lot of money. And I think it's quite important that schools work on a procedure whereby they can begin to help out those parents who are facing financial hardships, make it easier for them. There's many ways of doing it. I know, for example, when my son went to school, what they used to do is every September they would have a second-hand uniform sale. And when they had a second-hand uniform sale, you could basically sort of provide the poorer sections of the community with uniforms at virtually, sort of very, very low prices. And there was, we did manage to make sure that everybody, even those who were really hard up, had access to this. And I think part of the job of a good headmaster or headmistress is to make sure that they take into consideration people's economic sort of circumstances. But by all means, let's stick with the school uniform if we're going to crack the discipline problem in British education.
Nabila?
Well, one of the main issues here seems to be one of health, frankly, not allowing children to wear their warm coats because it covers their school uniform. I mean, some parents are complaining about that.
No, they had like a branded school uniform coat, and what they were saying is they wanted the children to wear that as part of their uniform. So they had like an almost branded like school jacket, I guess.
Meaning they cannot wear their own, and forcing children to buy expensive branded school uniforms is outrageous in my view. I think, I mean, it's obviously very traditional and very British, and there are very good reasons for it. For example, as Frank said, it enables you not to worry about looking fashionable, but also teaches you to conform in a certain environment and take pride in the education you're receiving. But it can become a problem when uniforms become a symbol of elitism and indeed money. Maybe there's some sort of compromise that can be put in place. I don't think nobody would object to subtle branded items such as a tie or a jumper with a badge on it, but forcing an entire, paraphernalia, as it were, which is vastly costly, especially, as you said, if you have a number of children, and it becomes a real financial burden
but of
for
course
parents.
it's there to eliminate opportunities for elitism and showing off. That's the whole point.
Well, unless you're wearing an Eton school uniform.
No, it's there to stop people rich kids turning up in Gucci coats, for example, if that was a possibility. So it's the reverse of what you're saying is its purpose. And I agree with Frank, but I think we underestimate the importance of dress in society at large still. Every contemporary society thinks that they're breaking all the rules and they're just wearing something that's fashionable. But actually dress, not just at the school level, but at every part of the society. We should be more celebrating the fact and recognizing the fact that clothes, uniforms, even the suit I'm wearing is a sort of uniform, that these actually express something about social function, social hierarchy, and conformity. And those are some of the things that help society work. They certainly help schools to work, and they help discipline in schools. And as I say, they're there to sort of eliminate showing off and rich kids being able to
Well,
turn
again,
up.
Unless you're wearing an Eton school uniform, in which case
That's
it doesn't
for Eton
eliminate.
school, and they're all wearing the same uniform. That is slightly unusual. In the majority of schools, the uniform is not like that, and it is the same for every child in that school. And of course, to that extent, it does, as Frank said, build up a sense of identity with the school, by contrast to another school further down the road. But whether that's important or not. But I think the discipline point is important, and also not, we were quite a poor family, went to school, had school uniform. We wouldn't have felt comfortable if there were richer people in the school turning up in their smart clothes and we were left in our slightly grungy uniform, where the elbows were out a bit because your parents are trying to make them last longer and so on.
But also, the reason why there is such hostility to school uniforms is because a lot of parents find it very difficult to tell their children to wear a particular kind of clothes. There's a sense in which a lot of parents would rather ignore the issue altogether and let their kids dress the way they want, because they find it very difficult to exercise authority over
that's
the
poor
behaviour of kids.
parenting, though, isn't it? Because my kid's not going to be telling me when he's 8 years old, he's not going to be telling me what he will and won't wear. If he's going to school and they've got a policy, I'll be telling him what he is wearing.
But a lot of parents aren't like you. That's the unfortunate thing. And I remember when I visit a lot of schools and I talk to people there. Very often you have this situation where you kind of wonder what's going through the minds of the parents to allow their kids to dress the way they do at a very, very, very early age, because it seems to me that they're not really exercising any degree of guidance or leadership over the behaviour of their children.
Well, Elizabeth has written in, and she's got an interesting point as well. She's just saying it's not just about discipline and behaviour, etc. in school. She says it also makes it easier to control behaviour in the streets because it gives an identity, I guess. And yeah, I suspect if you do have a kid that's misbehaving and you can identify which school he or she is from, then you can try and take action against it. Whereas if there's just some random kid doing stuff that they're not supposed to, I suspect it makes it much harder. But of course, they have to be affordable. A lot of people don't just have one child. As we mentioned, £337. Johnny has been in touch saying, but Michelle, if you can't afford to pay for stuff like school uniforms, don't have kids. He says children are a luxury, not a necessity, and it shouldn't be up to the rest of society to pay for and bring up other people's kids. There you go. That's says Johnny there on the email. I put up a little poll as well on the GB News Twitter earlier on asking this exact question. Do you think that schools should still have uniforms? So far, the answers are in. Nearly 92% of you say yes, you think that they should. Whereas 9% almost say no, you shouldn't. That poll's still open, I think. So if you do have a strong view on that, get in touch and let us know. Matt says, I agree with uniform, but why not just make it simple and cheap, like a jogging bottoms, fleece, and a blazer, etc. Why are they all so expensive? And I have to say, £337, that is a lot of money. And you would surely think that a school, one of their core objectives, if they have this policy, is to make it accessible and affordable to all.
What would you pay to clothe a child to go to school if there wasn't a uniform? I genuinely want to know.
Well, I grew up in France, for example, and there are very few school uniforms, but I can assure you that pupils often wear the same kind of sports gear or casual clothing, and we all end up looking uniform anyway.
You have to spend something. You're not going to send the child to school naked. So what would you spend, Michelle, you're a mother, what would you think you'd spend to kit your child out to go to school?
Well,
bearing in mind the weather, they've got to have a coat, they can't just go in a T-shirt.
Yeah, well, you've picked the absolute wrong person to ask, as I am the tightest mum in the whole world, much to the embarrassment of my partner. So I would think to myself, well, it's only school, he's going to do whatever he's going to do to his trousers. So I would have very cheap clothing, and I'm also one of those mums, I'll be honest, Daniel, and I will be buying about 3 sizes too big so that he'll grow into it. So my poor kid will be going to school with sleeves flapping around here and lengths that he's tripping over. So I'm probably the wrong parent to ask.
Psychologically damaged, of course.
I know. Poor kid. Yeah, my son will struggle for the wrong reasons. But I don't know. That is an interesting question, though. Get in touch. You tell me.
You would spend some money, wouldn't you? It's not £337 that you would get back if there was no school uniform. You'd still have to spend some of that money.
But most schools charge the cost is far less than that amount of money. Where I live, where they have uniforms, I bet you it's half that price. There's no need for school uniforms to cost over £300.
Well, there you go. That is an interesting question. My son's not of school age yet, so I don't buy him stuff. I do get him incredibly cheap nursery gear, though, much to the embarrassment of my partner. Anyway, so if you've got school-age kids and you don't put them in uniform, let me know. Just give me an average outfit cost for school to answer Daniel's question there. But before I head off, I just want to ask you, have you had any kind of New Year's resolutions? Did you start the New Year's with good intentions? Apparently, lots of us, and I have to say, myself included, actually, I decided to go vegetarian this year. But according to latest research, Brits only last 13 days before ditching their environmentally friendly habits, such as recycling and eating less meat and reducing the use of their cars. That's very impressive, quite frankly, that if people lasted 13 days, because I think on the 2nd of January, I forgot I was a vegetarian and tucked into a pork pie. So anyone that lasted 13 days, quite frankly, you've done 11 more than me, so I salute you. Anyone on this panel, did you start any good intentions in January and didn't see them through, Frank?
Well, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't drink so much wine. I usually have a half a bottle of wine with my meal every night. And I lasted until the 4th of January.
The 4th, so you lasted a few days there. Nabila, any good intentions?
Not really. I have tried to have good intentions every day of the year, to be honest.
Do you? Oh,
Yeah.
gosh, you're
You're
so
an angel.
good. Daniel, did you have any
I don't need
resolutions?
artificial deadlines.
I never set New Year's resolutions.
Don't
and
you?
I'm always successful in my ambition.
Are you?
I never fail to meet any of them. I don't have that sense of disappointment. I don't want to make any changes. I'm perfectly happy with the sort of food I eat. I eat meat and I enjoy it. I think veganism is probably dangerous to your health. It certainly gives you bad breath, and from what I can see, sort of vegans tend to sort
Is that a hint?
Bad,
I've got to say, he says giving up meat gives you bad breath. I do have to caveat this. I only lasted 2 days, so I don't think he's talking about me.
They start to get anemic and, and their joints go. So I wouldn't encourage veganism or anything like that.
Oh, well, there you go. Anyway, Jackie's been in touch saying, I'll tell you what, when it comes to school uniforms, if she bought something from a supermarket, she'd pay £30 for her trousers, £26 for a shirt. So there you go. What's that, 56?
Yeah, but you can't send the kid out in a shirt and trousers, so you need a coat.
Yeah, good point, Jackie. The no flies on
Yeah.
Daniel. You didn't include the coat. And what about the shoes as well? There you go, shoes. That's another aspect.
Well, they're additional, I think, to the school uniform, so we shouldn't count them. But,
Most schools insist on a dark shoe.
yeah,
Dark shoe.
And no trainers, whatever. I think when it adds up, you're spending £100 plus, so you haven't saved the 337. That's the point I'm making.
There you go. I mean, I never actually thought I would say these words, but I'm going to leave these two guys chatting school uniforms and shoes and coats because that is all we've got time for. Thank you very much to my panel and thank you at home for your company. He's getting up and leaving already. We've not finished yet. Anyway, I shall see you on Monday, 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock. Have yourselves a very good evening in the meantime.
Hello. Fog and frost to start this weekend once again for many of us. Quite a lot of clouds then through the rest of the day on Saturday before it brightens up for many of us on Sunday. Now, high pressure has been with us for quite some time, still in charge of the weather at the moment, but we do have these weather fronts waiting in the wings and they will start to influence our weather during the course of this weekend. But before then, fog and frost are the order of the day. Overnight tonight, reforming quite widely, particularly across parts of England and Wales. Central and eastern England particularly prone, I think, to some fairly dense fog patches tonight and into the start of the day tomorrow. And we do have a weather warning in force.